we have Mr. Imran Mia from BBC Urdu. We'll be speaking on social media and the rise of militancy in Pakistan. And then after that, we have from Norway, we have Dr. Lars Gull from Oslo Met University. Sir, I hope I pronounced your surname correctly. Okay, thank you. Okay, and he'll be talking about the Norwegian youth, social media, and IS fascination. So, little introduction about Mr. Tahir. Mr. Tahir Imran Mia is an award-winning digital journalist, digital and social media specialist. He has worked with BBC World Service as social media editor for BBC Urdu. Mr. Tahir graduated from University of Bedfordshire in 2007 with a BA Honours in Television and Media Production. During this time, he worked for the United Nations, Al Jazeera, and Brook Lapin Productions. For Pakistani media, he worked for Herald Media Group, which is now known as Aurora Broadcasting, for their English news channel, Dawn News. Mr. Tahir also worked for France 24 and various other news organizations. Since 2012, Mr. Tahir worked with BBC Urdu, and part of his responsibilities were to look after their social media platforms. In 2018, two of his stories broke records. The investigative story about how police captured the murderer of Zainab and 6 other minor girls in Kasur, Punjab was the biggest story and also won a BBC award. Another record-breaking exclusive data story was about an Israeli jet visiting Pakistan. Mr. Tahir has worked on various projects within Pakistan, including crisis communication and media handling and public relations. And public relations of Punjab Police with the help of British High Commission. And I'll also introduce Dr. Gule just now. Dr. Lars Gule is an associate professor at the Department of International Studies and Interpretation, Oslo Metropolitan University, where he researches and teaches, among other things, extremism, multiculturalism, and Islam. He received his PhD from the University of Virgin in 2003. He was also Secretary General of the Norwegian Humanist Association from 2000 to 2005. Dr. Gule is a frequent participant in public debate, commenting on radio and television, and as lecturer and columnist. Life stance issues, freedom of religion, and freedom of expression are among the topics he often discusses. Dr. Gule is a current board member in the Palestine Solidarity Group and a deputy member of the Norwegian Pen Board. Okay, so we'll start with Mr. Tahir first, and during the lectures, I'll repeat myself what I've been saying in the last sessions as well. Put your audio on mute, and after the lecture, we'll have our question and answer session. Thank you so much, Mr. Tahir. Now over to you.
Thank you, Priya. Hello, Elizabeth Altaf Sahab. Thank you very much for inviting me. I mean, it's a really interesting topic and something that I've dealt with and worked for a very long time. Social media in Pakistan is quite different, I say, from the rest of the world. It's not even the same as it's in India, because our social media is divided on various strands. So it's not just sort of like a humongous group of people who are there. It has basically many layers, and every layer has its own dimensions, and there are people who are using. And what people have started doing in India, for example, now, like especially the Modi regime has started doing, that started quite early in Pakistan. So the current regime in Pakistan started using social media way before this whole thing was basically utilized by political parties or religious organizations. It has been a tool in the hands of militants. I remember that when there was no TV channel covering the militancy of Taliban and everything going on in tribal areas, we used to get emails, and we used to have people on Twitter basically tweeting about it. The famous spokesperson of Taliban, Hassanullah Hassan, used to be on Twitter, and he used to propagate about it. So first I'm going to talk about the demographics, basically. Pakistani social media has a lot of data available. The data that is available from the government side is not reliable, because what government does is they pick up the national telecommunication authority, that is Pakistan Telecommunication. They pick up their data and they consider that these are people who are using internet, or these people who have uh, internet. Mobile users are not considered as, because in Pakistan majority of people are not regular mobile users. What they do is they basically buy a package. That package lasts for a week or 2 weeks or a month, and then it goes off. So they are not regular, and they are not considered as regular users. So the current status that I read from the Pakistani authorities is around 20-22%. In my estimate, it's almost a double number of people who are on social media, who use internet. And then when we come to social media, the biggest two platforms are Google, YouTube, and then Facebook. But when I say Facebook, I include Instagram and WhatsApp in it as well, because WhatsApp on its own is a huge platform. It is always overlooked, it is always underestimated, and it has the capacity to do the worst kind of stuff that Facebook or Twitter or other platforms cannot do, because it's under the radar. Nobody knows what's going on in the messenger groups. Nobody knows what's happening in that. And that is where majority of the work that happens around militancy and these sort of activities happen. So roughly, if I pick up the figures, Pakistan has around 40 million Facebook users, profiles, let's say. And I always say that we have to take it with a pinch of salt, because almost 25% of them are duplicate profiles, men posing as women and women posing as men to hit others. So that's something very interesting that we find in Pakistani social media. Now, place of social media is really important in Pakistan, because nowadays, with increasing censorship, increasing curbs on press freedom, television channels are basically, or news channels specifically, that are controlled by the regime, and the way they basically tackle this, the way they are dealing with that, the way anchors are manipulated, media is manipulated. So we see that social media is an outlet. And it was an outlet for a very long time. Twitter was a place where a lot of conversation used to happen. Facebook was a lot of sort of like, how do I say, people who are in the decision-making ranks, they used to conversate on Twitter, and public used to conversate on Facebook. On Facebook pages, on Facebook groups, a lot of people basically talk to each other, and that's where they basically share their ideas, they share their thinking. And that is where I took a lot of data from, because I used to moderate comments, one of the vicious ones, the worst kind of comments. My understanding of Pakistani slang or abusive words when I joined in 2012 was very little. I used to just remember a few abusive words about mothers and sisters and that sort of thing. The variations of that, I wish I can publish the profanity list that Facebook page, BBC Urdu's Facebook page has. It would be a startling combination of abusive words. I mean, the abusive words that go to sectarian lines, then that go to ethnic lines. So the abusive words about Pashtuns, the abusive words about Shias, the abusive words about Qadiani. I mean, I did not know that Rafizi was a word. I did not know. That is very much used. So every time there is a story about Hafiz al-Assad or Bashar al-Assad or Syria, everybody starts, there is a sectarian war going on in the message, in the comment section. People accusing each other, oh, you Shias, you doing that. Even in Corona, for example, recently, when Corona started, there was a sectarian battle going on there. So that is the place of social media. So almost a lot of people are there. And then it travels into the underground, what I say. Things happening on Facebook, Twitter, trickle down to WhatsApp, Facebook messengers, and then they travel onwards. So every video, every viral content, photo has a life, and it turns back and come to you. So it's shared offline. And that is where a lot of stuff that basically happens, and a lot of stuff that is under the radar. And that is the biggest worry that I have. Then we talk about TikTok. TikTok is an emerging platform. Pakistani youth uses TikTok. I was not a very avid user of that. It's addictive. You cannot, how do you say, you cannot basically find a lot of time for that because it leads from one video to the other, and you continue watching that and you cannot get yourself out of it. So TikTok is a platform where a lot of people are doing a lot of activities, and that is where I think a lot of stuff happening. For example, I looked at migrants coming from Pakistan to Europe, and a lot of them are TikToking their journeys. Even some of them who are um, uh, thrown out of the countries where they have claimed asylum and the application has failed, they are basically deported. They are filming that and live streaming that or sharing those videos on TikTok. And at the same time, sectarian groups who basically work on different agendas, they also have people sharing their videos there. Now coming to the recruitment. Social media helps to build the concepts of sectarian lines or hatred lines or specific ideas that people use to basically develop a kind of psyche or mentality. And when I say that, it's done in two ways. So first of all, your immediate circle of friends basically introduces you to this kind of ideas. So for example, you are on Facebook, you continue to consume news from, let's say, international broadcasters, and you basically read comments. In the comments, you engage with certain people. Those people then introduce you to certain type of comments. Now, normally you follow your instinct. You like somebody, you send friend request, you pick up the conversation, you talk to each other, and that's how you develop that. But what algorithms are doing is algorithms are making a lot of these like-minded people who are hate preachers, who are advocating militancy, who are advocating hate, they're collecting them. Let me give a simple example. My brother is free these days, he's at home, so he watches a lot of Bollywood films. I don't watch Bollywood films. So I accidentally clicked on a clip of Bollywood's films, and then now in my timeline I see a lot of suggestions for Indian films, Bollywood films, that come to my page. Imagine you are somebody who is interested or who has a bit of curiosity about militants, about the war crimes of American regime in Iraq or Afghanistan, or you have some kind of fascination about Mullah Omar or Osama bin Laden. You search something and it's so shocking. I was talking to somebody about freelance platforms, Fiverr and Upwork. I just picked up my phone and I searched, okay, www.fiverr.com. Few hours later, when I logged on to Facebook, two adverts were on my timeline. Fiverr, Upwork, promoted content on my timeline. Imagine I was sitting with my friend and talking about Osama bin Laden, talking about some militant organization, what I would see on my Facebook. The second thing that is happening is that WhatsApp listens to you, it records your conversations. A lot of people don't realize that. And through those conversations, Facebook uses the data to suggest related content to you. So when I was basically talking to quite a few people who had a lot of my one of job was to communicate with people who are writing nasty comments on Facebook on BBC Urdu's page. I used to sometimes call people as well. Let's chat about it. Why you hate BBC? Why you think that this is something wrong? Why you think Malala is a conspiracy? And these kind of questions I used to tackle them. So a lot of time, the thing that comes to their mind is that, oh, have you seen that content? Have you seen this? Have you seen that? Have you seen this story? Have you seen that link? So it's the mentality and it's the understanding they get from social media. My brother-in-law, for example, I'll pick up a lot of conspiracy theories from him. So he was talking to me about how Corona was basically conspiracy and stuff. So I sat down with him and I looked at his Facebook profile. The problem was there because he was following a couple of pages that basically a couple of profiles. Sorry, I was not visible in the small screen. So I had to look at that, and he was following a few pages, and then Facebook was giving him more information related to those pages there. Now, how this whole information gathers and basically comes to the mind of people who want to recruit people or who want to be recruited or who have like-minded attitudes. Majority of these people who basically are interested in militancy or interested in these sort of ideologies from social media, I believe, have very common strands. You find the person who is the worst abuser, who is using a lot of nasty words, who's using. When you go to the profile, the big image, the display image, maybe it's his image. If not, then it's Imran Khan's image. Most of the time, he will have a lot of interesting Quranic verses and Quranic sayings on that. And then if you go down, like if you have time, like me, sometime when you are stalking somebody, if you go down, let's say a year or 2 years or 3 years, then you find the filth that basically transformed them. So this guilt that is used to manipulate. So for example, if a person goes to a madrasa, for example, or a militancy recruitment center, the person over there does not know who this guy is. Facebook provides that context. So if I, as an individual, can scroll down and look at a profile for a year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 years, imagine if I am a very smart recruiter like IS has, they would go down and they will look at your profile, they will look at your vulnerabilities, they will look at your images. I posted, Altaf Saab is on my Facebook, so I posted a photo of a guy, a boy, he's I think 19, 20 from Karachi. There is a controversy going on about Mullah Tariq Jameel in Pakistan. And he posted images about that Quran prohibits this, Islam prohibits this, whatever is prohibited, there's this. So I picked up 2 photos from his profile where he was sitting with women and women were not doing parda. So I posed the question that these women should be in parda. If you are talking about prohibition and haram and all of this, according to the mullah that you're supporting, you should not be sitting with namehram khawateen, like women who are not in your immediate family, you should not be sitting with them. So imagine if I am somebody who is not posing this question as a journalist or researcher, I can manipulate that. And one of the youngest suicide bombers who basically blew himself up in 7/7 bombings in London, he was 19-year-old, and the reasons he got brainwashed or was his lifestyle that he basically projected. And the imam at that mosque realized that this guy is not somebody who is the best of Muslim or whatever. And the conversation they started having resulted into eventually him going and blowing himself up in London. And the main strands of those conversations that British intelligence officers found out were exploitation on the basis of his past life, what he has done in the past life to that. Now, recruitment channels, it's very fascinating world. And if you basically get onto that, so you will realize that it works in a organic way. So suddenly, let's say at 10 p.m. or there is specific time, a group is created, a messenger group, a WhatsApp messenger group is created. And that messenger group starts, I'm adding my friends, everybody's adding different friends, and they are exchanging ideas. And there in these groups, so I have been added to these 2 groups, 2 different types of groups, not from a real profile, from a profile that I created for a story. Twice. Once I was doing on child sexual abuse, how that happens on Facebook, and once about this. So these people add, and there the conversation is added, and at the end of the conversation, the group disappears, the conversation is gone, nothing is left. So if, for example, I as a parent or somebody who wants to look at the data, I don't have any information because the group was created, everything happened, and then it disappears. So main conversations, main contacts are cultivated through these platforms like this way. And the fodder for that is videos of Iraq, videos of Israeli army mishandling, killing. I mean, these days there is a video being circulated that Israeli army strangled a boy and killed him. I don't know if he died or not, but that video is being shared. I see that video coming to my timeline a lot of times. And these type of videos are basically fodder for recruiters and those who wants to join, because you feel angry. When I look at my younger years, there was no social media, but there was Pakistan television, and it used to show images of Kashmiri people murdered or butchered. I used to get shocked because, you know, when you do autopsy, there are stitches on your torso. I used to think somebody has basically cut the person. I did not had any context. I did not had any idea. So I used to feel very, very angry on that, what India is doing and what. Imagine these people who don't have the luxury to go and research what's happening. They don't have the luxury to basically Google what is happening. They don't have the luxury to basically research any idea about that video or the image or story that is coming their way. I mean, it's so shocking that few days ago there was an English story that in China they are slapping fines on people who are breaking Corona lockdown. One of the leading Urdu websites translated it that people in China who break lockdown are slapped and then fined. And then a leading columnist who is a very thinker, he wrote a proper column on it. So if this is the level of people who are intellectuals, who are smart, who sit on TV channels like pundits and stuff, I mean, for Priya, for your context, he is the Arnab Goswami, slightly lower than that of Pakistan, somewhere there. So that is what happens. And the lack of context, the lack of understanding, the lack of knowledge about historic perspective of these images, or where these, I mean, there is an image that I always rebut. And that image is shared by many, many people to basically cite hatred against Shias, cite hatred against the Bashar al-Assad regime or anybody. A boy crossing the border from Jordan to Syria to Jordan, a lone boy across the thing, whatever. That image is rebutted, clarified many times. His family was just few steps away, but he was, because he's young and he has a bag with him, he was left behind. Nobody's going to Google that because that images comes to you. There are few aid workers who are talking to him bent down and he's basically the center of the image. Nobody's going to research that. There are tweets with 50,000 retweets of that image without any verification, without anything, because people don't bother to go and check that. There is no concept of even basic Googling. Leave alone the reverse image search or detailed forensic analysis of what's happening. So I think that social media, especially with the algorithm context, recently there was an article in New York Times as well about it. The algorithm element makes it very, very attractive for these people who basically want to find like-minded ideologists. And then the production level. If you look at the IS videos, there is a proper research study done on that they use a lot of Hollywood style filming, Hollywood style editing, graphics to basically film their videos and to basically plan their atrocities, and they execute those atrocities on the lines of that, because that kind of fight scenes, that kind of use of weaponry fascinates this generation who is into PUBG, for example. I mean, PUBG is a very, very interesting game. And I did not included PUBG or games into this because I don't consider that as social media, but they also have chat rooms. Imagine the complexity. So you are a very, very lethal player on PUBG, and somebody who wants to use you as a recruited militant or whatever, you have everything there. You have your credentials, you are doing lethal killing, you have shared your information with people who are there, and these are chat rooms. So summing up, I'm thinking that Richard A. Clarke, the first counterintelligence chief that America appointed, he wrote a book, Against All Enemies, and at the last page of that book, he writes that there will be a time when actually he's writing about there was a chart in Bush administration, George H.W. Bush, his administration, where there was Osama bin Laden, there was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, everybody else was there, and he used to cross every time somebody was captured or killed. So Richard A. Clarke writes that there will be a time when a lot of people on that chart will be crossed, they will be captured or killed, but then a new breed of militants will be crawling up in the back alleys of Karachi, Baghdad, Cairo, or many other cities. And that is what is happening, because right now we don't have a figurehead who basically we can say, okay, let's kill him and then we can kill the organization of it. We can kill. We don't know who's heading IS. We don't know who's heading Taliban, how many strands of Taliban, how many groups of Taliban are there, who are part of them, and then who is possessing that. It's like Corona, because you don't know if the person has the symptoms or not. Sometimes people are very, very reasonable. They are conversating with you. But when you talk to them in detail, the sort of hatred they show against Shias or Sunnis or Ahmadis, the hatred they show against Pashtuns or Pashtuns, people from Pashtuns who show hatred against the military, that kind of attitudes are very, very scary. And these kind of attitudes are the breeding ground of militancy, and social media makes it easy. It's just like when in the past, when you wanted to date somebody, you had to go find somebody, or for example, let's talk about the worst kind of scenarios. If you wanted to basically pay for sex, it would be, now it's easy. Google tells you, these apps tells you how many hookers are in your surrounding and how can you hire that. And this social media is basically facilitating these organizations, and IS has used it extremely well, extremely well. Majority of people are picked from social media conversations. If I can pick people, a lot of friends I have now on social media, I have never met them. There is a guy in Saudi Arabia I talk to often. I never met that guy. Luqman, he's from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. His name is Luqman. I got in touch with him when I was doing my Israeli jet story, and he had some kind of data. So imagine if you are part of this kind of mentality, or part of, you have this kind of thinking, and you are your ideal place is social media. So I'm going to sum up here, and if you have any questions, I'm going to answer that, so I can further elaborate what I missed and then take it from there.
Thank you very much. I think you already have a question from Safa.
Yes, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Oh, I see Elizabeth.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth.
I was just using Signal. You also can use its reactions at the bottom of the page, where you can clap your hands for a good introduction. That's what I did. Nobody else did, but I guess somebody else also means that.
There's a question from Safa, there's a question from Safa Ilyas in the group chat, where she's asking that, is there any policy makers are there any policymakers or responsible organization for social media in Pakistan? And can you share the link of recent statistics you talk about regarding Pakistani social media users?
Okay, there is a global platform that is called VR Social. They release a report annually, and if you search VR Social Pakistan report, you can find majority of the data related to Pakistan over there. The report about Pakistan would be over 20 to 25 pages long, where they will talk about number of internet users, and then there will be discussion about number of I cannot show it here, but that platform has details about the social media demographics of Pakistan. It's taken from official sources. When you talk about government organizations, so if I understand the question right, who basically regulate the social media, or who deals with that? Is that the question?
Of course, if we talk about that, it's a platform of a hatred and a hate speech, as you experience too. So how can we stop it? And your experience regarding if anybody control the situation, Pakistan Telecommunication or any policy makers?
Unfortunately, you cannot. I'm sorry to disappoint. There is no way you can control this, because let's face it, there is the only way to basically control this is to have a wider dialogue.
Sir, please, now you can start.
Thank you. I am moving into share screen mode, and we will see if we can make this work. There we are. This is the topic I have been asked to talk about, and I assume Elizabeth has asked me to talk about this because my research is on extreme Islamism, and I have followed almost all the court cases against returned foreign fighters from Norway. A number of them been arrested and sent to trial, and all of them have been convicted either for participation in a terrorist group organization or terrorist conspiracy. So I will talk a little bit, or this is the background for my reflections on Norwegian youth, social media, and fascination with the Islamic State. However, just to tie it to the previous discussion, there are, of course, examples of grooming. You have recruiters who are focusing on certain individuals, and they are taking a lot of time in persuading them to join, to travel to Syria, and so on. This is not what I have studied, or that we have a lot of examples of in the Norwegian context. We have a social background where people known each other have decided to go together to Syria to a very large extent. So it is internally driven, not as much through grooming activities, but, and I will come to that, we're also, of course, talking about Islamic State propaganda. So, briefly on the background, we're talking about approximately 100 young Muslims from Norway traveling to Syria in the period from 2012 till 2015. After the fall, after 2015 or 15-16, there are not really many that have tried to travel. Most of these have joined eventually, not necessarily in the beginning, but they have joined the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, and then what became the Islamic State from 2014, the summer of 2014. We have some characteristics. We are talking about people in their early mid-20s. There are a few examples of older people, but most of these people are young Muslims. They have little education. They have, it seems that they stop, and not all even past secondary school. They have what our security police in an analysis have said, a loose attachment to the labor market, meaning that they have not been properly employed. And actually, all have been unemployed at the time of travel. They did not work. They did not have a job at that time. About 10 of them, we're not quite sure if it's 10, 11, or 12, but approximately 10 women, some with children, have traveled, brought with them their children, and of course they established families, got more children while in Syria. And some of them are today in detention camps in the Iraqi-controlled areas of Syria. One has returned with a child. About 10% of those who traveled from Norway were converts, ethnic Norwegians, so to speak, and they were converts to Islam. So why did they travel? The reasons that we have seen, and here social media is part of the background, because they were not, as I said, they were not groomed by the Islamic State or Islamist groups in Syria, but they discussed between themselves, and they posted on Facebook their ideas of what was going on in Syria and what needed to be done. So we have reasons, and we can roughly put it into three phases. In the first period, after the Arab Spring, when the confrontations in Syria turned into a civil war, there was the arguments that they would contribute to the humanitarian effort. And some left to Syria with humanitarian aid, and that was it. Others left with humanitarian aid, decided to stay and participate in the armed struggle. So they were supporting the uprising against the tyrannical regime. Then we had an intermediate period where Muslims and Islam became more of a focus, more explicit arguments. We need to defend Muslims. And then what they meant by Muslims were Sunni Muslims against the Alawi regime of Bashar al-Assad. And of course, in that, as an addition, was a defense of Islam, true Islam. Also, there were arguments against Western imperialism and influence. Paradoxically, even though the opposition, the rebels, had support, political and to a certain extent humanitarian support from the West, the fact that the West did not, like in Libya, start bombing the regime or establish no-fly zones, it was seen as a sign that the West was really supporting the oppression of Muslims. So we can talk about the third period from mid-2014. Of course, these are not very distinct periods. They are overlapping. But now the emphasis is on defending Islam and then Muslims. And of course, this has to do with the emergence of the Islamic State as perhaps the most important actor, at least in Western media. So it came out also as support for the Islamic State. But we have also seen that many said, I'm going there to live according to Sharia. They wanted to live in an Islamic state. They wanted to migrate from Dar al-Harb or even Jahiliyyah, as was the expression in some instances, to the Islamic state, to Dar al-Islam. They wanted to do hijrah. The Islamic State was emphasizing in some of its propaganda the parallel between the hijrah of the Prophet from Mecca to Medina, the importance of true Muslims to live in an Islamic state in the caliphate. And for some, even from Norway, this became an important part of their motivation. So what we see is that the reasons, the motivations became more ideological, theological over time with the developments in the civil war in Syria and the emergence of the Islamist groups in general and Islamic State in particular as important, important actors. So the motivations of those who left from Norway, and the parallel is clear to other parts of Europe and I suspect other parts of the world. The reasons were resonating with the propaganda from Islamists, the Salafi jihadists, and especially Islamic State propaganda. So this propaganda was initially spread by different groups. They had all their media platforms using Twitter, Facebook, etc., etc. But the Islamic State, as we know, became very good at spreading this message. So there is general agreement. And I should emphasize that this is not my particular field of study. I have not done any in-depth study of Islamic State propaganda through social media. But it is the general agreement amongst reporters and academics that the Islamic State was, and perhaps still is, very media savvy. They are good at this. They used social media extensively, all kinds of platforms. Again, not my specialty, so I don't even know the names of all these platforms, but they had a huge output of professional produced printed propaganda, video films. Total, we're talking about over the years, obviously, millions of single messages, a huge total output when you add up all the postings, tweets, etc. It was spread by different Islamic State media outlets. Each province in the Islamic State, not only in Syria and Iraq, but also in Egypt, Yemen, Libya, etc., had their own media outlets, and they all tried to deliver something every day. All of it, or most of it, was in Arabic, They had a lot in Arabic, but also in many different languages. So they were able to use their human resources, different backgrounds, very well, is because you can see that the language, when they write in English, for example, it is written by English native speakers. And they are capable of utilizing the social media as well as video filming, etc., in a highly professional manner. So they are spreading a sort of diverse message to different audiences, different backgrounds, to converts as well as to traditional Muslims. There is a difference in the message to men and women, etc. So if we analyze this, and I'm referring to an article by Aron Zelin, who has analyzed the content of messages in a specific week, but I think it is fairly representative. So the analysis show that there are the top 6 topics in propaganda and information from the Islamic State. It has a military character. They are informing about military events, battles, etc. They are telling a lot about governance, how life is going on, how people are governed in the Islamic State territories. There is, of course, missionary activity, dawah, in their propaganda. They are also emphasizing the hisbah, the way they are performing or carrying out justice, ensuring justice in society on a daily basis and in everyday life. And this is not only law in the strict sense of something that is implemented by the government as such, but this is also the morality that is policed literally, because the Hizbah had police functions. Content is also promotion of the caliphate as such. As I mentioned, you should emigrate, it's the duty of all Muslims, etc. They're also emphasizing enemy attacks. So how do they present this? Well, all of this is intended to encourage members of the Islamic State or the subjects in the caliphate, and it's also to recruit new members outside the territory they control. So why did this message appeal? What we know is that at least 40,000, maybe more, so-called foreign fighters, it's a misnomer here because it also includes women, but maybe between 40 and 50,000 traveled to Syria and Iraq, but mostly to Syria. So why did they travel? What was the fascination? What was the appeal of the message? Well, first of all, we can see that the numbers increased tremendously during the summer of 2014 when the Islamic State had success. So that is a known phenomenon, that nothing breeds success like success. And the military victories, they were very important in the summer of 2014. So in August, September, there were thousands, literally so many new migrants entering Islamic State territory that they hardly could process them all, and they tried to process them. The message contains also dehumanizing the enemy. The enemy, they are unbelievers. They are really those who are using violent means in the most abhorrent way. And this is true in the sense that while the Islamic State is dehumanizing the enemy and can illustrate this not only through verbal characterization, but they can add to it. For example, the regime videos or videos taken by regime soldiers of how they are mistreating, torturing, killing the opposition in Syria. So, of course, dehumanizing goes both ways here. But we also know that they use this to justify their revenge attacks and their revenge against hostages and so on. They emphasize that they are controlling an organized society where daily life is going on in a normal fashion. There is an emphasis also on beautiful pictures of nature, sunsets, etc. We know that from advertisements for in the tourism industry. So they also used this to emphasize the organized society, an organized society based on Islamic law, the Sharia, which has an appeal in itself for many Muslims, of course. So they present a society with a good life, with social services for all. And it's very interesting that when you have examples of so-called grooming, when you have individuals trying to entice their friends back home to travel, they would say, here everything is free. We got a house, we got an apartment, we are paid, everything is taken care of, hospital is free, etc., etc. The quality of those services can be questioned though, but this is how it was presented, both in the formal propaganda and in the activity of members or people who had traveled there. So the Dawah, the missionary activity, is about spreading the Islamic State version of Islam, internally and externally. Internally, this was important and very much a part of their propaganda that they were spreading, actually demanding, especially of new recruits, that they should go through a Sharia course to learn how Islam is to be understood, of course, in the Islamic State version. And this is also what they propagated and practiced internally. So they were propagating the possibility of living in an Islamic state, and they were insisting that this is a duty for Muslims, so they should migrate to the caliphate as soon as possible. And they were building a state, so they were emphasizing both the duty of Muslims to do the hijrah, but they were also advertising in the sense that they said, we need doctors, we need teachers, we need engineers, we need a lot of people to fill all the functions in a state. So that was also part of the emphasis in some of their propaganda. So there is also an apocalyptic and a millennial message, because they were emphasizing in their dawah that the end is near. We are moving towards end times. And one can discuss if they meant that it is imminent, the day of judgment is actually very near, or if they were seeing a phase of the long rule of a just society before the day of judgment. But of course, again, in uncertain times, this sort of message, apocalyptic message, we have historical evidence for this amongst when studying apocalyptical and millennial movements in Europe in the Middle Ages, that in uncertain times, these sorts of messages, they have an appeal. They are attractive to people. And given the background of those who are traveling and the Norwegian profile characteristics is not uncommon. So if everything looks bleak, you have no education, you have no job, and someone is telling you the end is near, okay, let me save my soul and do something meaningful, useful towards the end of times anyway. So in this message, the role of violence is important. It is important as the consequence of the dehumanized enemy. It's important as a consequence of war, and it is important in the notion of end of times spread by the Islamic State. So this explains maybe some of the appeal, the fascination. This message, the end of times, the end is near, means that it is important to repent and to defend Islam, to live in the right way, to ensure salvation. So with the success of the Islamic State, this message could seem to be true. I mean, they were succeeding in 2014 and 15. Took some time before they were beaten back and had to go on the defensive. So the success in itself could explain why a lot of, especially young people, felt that the message was true or could be true. And in this context, we could also say that violence will have a greater appeal as a means in a situation where the day of judgment draws near. It becomes part of the great conflagration, the upheavals that are unavoidable anyway. So why should we bother about it? On the contrary, we can push the wheels of history by taking part in this movement, including the use of violence in this movement. And these are my personal observations, and I've written an article about it and give you a reference to it at the end or in the PowerPoint if you want it. That you could say that they participating in or viewing extreme violence can have a cathartic function, release strong emotions. I mean, this is a concept going back to Greek thinking about the theater, Greek theater plays, where you can say that, okay, this is something that releases tension, emotional tensions in people. And when we look at the way, as it was said by Tahir, that the Islamic State were copying Hollywood films, they were copying the how do you say it? They were copying these war games or plays, you know, internet war games. And what is characteristic of an American action, a Hollywood action movie, is an enemy who is so brutal that you know at the start of the film that this person is going to be beaten to death by the hero. You know, he's going to be thrown off the top of a building. He's going to be killed and he deserves it. This is catharsis. You know, we have seen the enemy, we have seen the villain, he's raping someone, he's torturing someone. We know the hero is going to end him off at the end. And when that happens, even if you're a pacifist, you will feel relieved. So this is the catharsis of such films, such editing, and such directing. And it struck me that perhaps this is part of the appeal of the message when we have seen the beheading videos. We have one example, and this was from Norwegian social media. One of the Islamists in Norway had just received one of the beheading videos, and he was sharing it with others in his group. And he said, here is a new video, sit down and enjoy. And you know, it seems to be such an evil intent, and that is what I've tried to understand. Why can people feel like this? Because we're talking about emotions. We're talking about strong emotions. We're talking about a bundle of emotions, and they could be called, with the German philosopher Nietzsche, ressentiment. It is different from resentment because this is a syndrome. This is a bundle of emotions. This is something that are influencing us in a very strong, way. And ressentiment consists of a sense or feeling, an emotion of victimhood. It's combined with hate and vengefulness. And if you have these three strong emotions together, interacting with each other, you have a situation where someone is filled with ressentiment. But this is not only an individual, emotion. It is an emotion that creates and reinforces identity. So it works also on a collective level. It is part of become part of a group identity. So Islamic State propaganda, emphasizing both Muslim victimhood, vengeance, legitimizing hate, plays into this, utilizes ressentiment. I don't know if they have done so consciously. They have definitely not used the word ressentiment. This is an analytical approach to what we have observed. But in this sense, Islamic State propaganda not only allows, but also justifies even the most sadistic violence against the enemy. And in this, we can see catharsis, the release of ressentiment, something that release can be said to restore, in a way, an emotional balance. So this is the background for why I think we need to look closer at emotions when we are going to see how the effect of propaganda, especially through social media, works. So if it is a relevant or correct analysis, then it gives us a tool to, and here I've actually used the wrong word. I'll come back to that. I said an explanation, but I mean understanding the fascination with the group. But there are, of course, other aspects that are relevant. In a more limited sense, the notion of jihad, important in Islamic State propaganda, is a means to salvation, but also cleansing. I mean, if you participate in a jihad and you're not killed and becomes a martyr, then you are still cleansed of all your sins. And a lot of these young people, they not only had a loose connection to the labor market, but they were often involved in crime. Some in serious crime, others in petty crime, but they would see a need to cleanse themselves from this. So the end of times, the apocalyptic message is important and appealing also to some in itself. So is the notion of Islamic justice in the Sharia state. So we will not have one part or one aspect that explains all the fascination of the Islamic State, because various supporters are fascinated by various aspects of the propaganda, as we have also seen amongst the Norwegian youth, and there are clear similarity between the youths from Norway and other countries. So the fascinated youth, could we say that they were marginalized? To a large extent, they were, depending on your definition of marginalization. But is a marginalization the same as a polarized society? This is something that should be discussed. I'm not sure. But if we're talking about marginalized youth leading to a polarization in society, then we could say that this explains or makes understand ressentiment, and therefore the movement into an extremist position. This is a possible way of understanding. And I emphasize understanding. In the humanist way, I mean, in the not as a natural science explanation. We don't have a predictive theory. We don't have a model that say, if you have that factor and that factor, then we know that this person is going to become a killer. Then he's going to become an extremist. We don't have that. And this is very important, and it is very important when you're talking about radicalization, because then you have the idea that, okay, let us find all the vulnerability factors, then we have a predictive theory and we can prevent. No, we cannot. We do not have a predictive theory, not by far. And I don't think we will get, because you would have to have such an input of elements in order to predict that it would be impossible to fulfill, except in a totally totalitarian state. So hopefully this is food for thought. It's an attempt to understand the appeal of Islamic State and not to explain, but in a natural science way. But perhaps it could be a way of thinking that can help us understand. So I think we still have a few minutes for comments or questions.